Justin. I'll just share my screen and thanks everyone for joining in again. And like Justine said, what we will hope to do today is to try and build on the discussion we started last week. Um, I hope my screen is visible and I'm audible. Um, yeah, great. So our focus today will, like Justine said, is to try and see if there is a role for local communities, and if so, what that role can be. So that's where our conversation will focus today. But before we go on to doing that, I think we had a very, very useful discussion last week where Raghuji and Joanna both introduced us to the idea of conservation tourism and how that was separate from what can be seen as ecotourism. And we realized that we had a very fruitful discussion around the definitions, and it was nice to have. But just so that we don't get too bogged down by definitions and the complications that they might sometimes bring, here are some of the points we discussed: that what sets apart conservation tourism from any other form of tourism. So essentially, it's designed and integrated uh, with the conservation planning. Uh, and that the stakeholder participation is right through the process. Also, the fact that the aim is that it benefits the community as a whole and not particular individuals within the community, and that the main consideration is that it will bring benefits to biodiversity conservation. And last, but also very, very important point, is the fact that uh, there are efficient regulations that take care of checks and balances, and that there are adequate evaluation mechanisms. So these were points I've just borrowed from Joanna's presentation. So um, this is just to sort of remind us of what we had started with. But coming back to snow leopard landscapes, and you all very well know that snow leopard landscapes are spread across um, 12 range countries, spanning an area of roughly 1.2 to 1.6 million square kilometers of the high mountain areas. Interestingly, uh, looking at some of the literature, one realizes that of this area, roughly 14 to 19% is protected by various means through the various arrangements that governments may have in their respective countries. There are roughly 170 protected areas in this stretch of land, and about 40% of those uh, are in size uh, small enough to not support the range of even a single male snow leopard. This is again based on a paper that was published by Johansson et al. In 2016. But the point I'm trying to make here is that this is a fairly large area which has certain pockets which are protected. But a vast majority of these landscapes are not protected by any legal arrangement. But also the fact that these areas are inhabited by people for generations, maybe for millennia. Uh, they practice, many of them practice agropastoralism or pastoralism, vocations which are deeply connected with these landscapes, and hence they share a very unique relationship with these landscapes. And so both people as well as the wildlife that one may find in these areas uh, depend very pervasively on the landscape. So it's very likely that you'll find wildlife within a protected area, but it's equally likely that you will find them outside protected areas. And that both people and wildlife occur in low densities. So having stated these points, which is based on the work that has happened in these landscapes, uh, let's come back to the question: why should local communities be central to conservation tourism? Uh, and what I would like all of us to do is to try and think of this question of why should local communities be central to conservation tourism? What could be the potential risks of involving them? What could be the potential drawbacks of not involving them? All of that. And if we could either post our views in using the chat window, or we could just take turns to sort of express our points. What I will also do is stop sharing my screen now, and we'll try and whiteboard the points that come from us, from all of the people. Justine or Kostub, if I could request one of you to, um, yeah, Kostub it is. Right. So take a moment to think about that question. Why are, uh, yeah, why should communities be central to tourism? Should they? Should they not? We can even start from there itself. And therein, what are people's perspectives on that? So let's take about a few minutes to think about this, list some points down before we move our conversation forward. Right. So Kostub, Terry says that local communities are vital to long-term conservation success, um, and so they must be involved. Terry, would you want to sort of elaborate a bit on that?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just really to get us started, I think one of the key um, points about conservation in not only in snow leopard areas, but I think in general is the importance of engaging the local people to get their buy-in, because long term you cannot have successful conservation without the buy-in of the local community. So I think activities that are related to conservation or tourism really must involve the local communities and must benefit the local communities in order to get that buy-in. And that creates a foundation for successful conservation.
Sure. Thanks, Terry. That was very nicely put. And you sort of reiterated on the point of buy-in, sort of having their concurrence in the plans that we make. Again, one of the points that was established when we spoke about conservation tourism. So now we're getting more points coming in. I'll sort of so. Um, Aftab says their livelihoods is linked with natural resources. Of course, very valid point, and hence that you know it they sort of rely on these landscapes. So that's an important link to sort of keep them involved. Communities should be central, says Rushal, and I think he goes on to explain a little further, and we'll come to that. Uh, Communities have ownership over land. Tourism will be an extraction of resources from their land. They should share the benefits of tourism. This ownership can also be crucial for conservation. Right, so that's Benazir's point. Um, and I agree, Benazir, that's a very valid point, though I think the way conservation tourism is being defined, and I think those were some of the points that Bezad and the others tried to make last week, is that it it should be planned and done in a manner that the extraction can be minimal, but nonetheless there could still be some sort point taken. Uh, Kostub, I hope I'm going fine. I'm just trying to sort of read through all of these points.
Yeah, no problem, Ajay. I'm actually copying them on the whiteboard. Constantly. Yeah. So great. Thanks.
And others can please feel free to join in the conversation if there are any other points they think they would like to make while I speak. Moisab is saying linked with minimizing of human snow leopard conflicts. That's also a very valid point. Moisab, would you want to elaborate a little bit on that, on this point that you were making about linking it to the conflicts?
Yeah, sure. I think it's basically because we all, as we all know about the losses they suffer due to the predations, and as this tourism, conservation tourism, is linked with the livelihoods of local communities, so eventually it would reflect on the this human snow leopard conflicts, because in a way, when that particular valley or a village would be, like promoted as a prominent or a primary tourism site, conservation tourism site. So it would help in developing or creating awareness among the communities that they should take the ownership of that the species as well as the landscapes, and just to sustaining the the biodiversity and the wildlife there, so that it's all like linked with the livelihood. And once they will be knowing that it is it will help in their economies or the livelihoods, so definitely they the conflicts, it will help in minimizing the conflicts. That was one point actually.
Sure. Thank you, Moisab. And I think that's on similar lines to what Anne is also trying to say, that it will help diversify revenues of local community members. So probably what means is that the source of livelihoods might be diversified, and that it would also help improve awareness and knowledge on species and why they should sort of I'm assuming. Anne, do you want to come in and sort of add to that from what you've just mentioned?
Me?
Anne Camille.
Anne Camille. Yeah.
Sorry, I did mute myself. So for which part did you want for me to explain?
I thought the second part you said it will help improve awareness and knowledge.
Yeah, so because if we, for my opinion is that if we involve the local communities in the tourism, so then they will better understand the ecological services that the wildlife can provide, and then they will be more like they will be more motivated then to protect the different wild species.
Sure.
And then also they can also talk about this to the other members of the local communities, and then have a much more broad range of actions.
Sure. Thank you. That's
You're welcome.
Very, very valid. Yeah. So development of tourism brings many changes, and focusing on conservation brings environmentally friendly, sustainable development. That's again a very valid point. One of the concerns often raised with tourism is that it can be a sort of a double-edged sword, but probably conservation tourism can allow us to address those concerns. Rushal says that reason being that they have the knowledge, local know-how of the terrain, customs, people, etc. True, Rushal. Like I said, that many of these communities could have been inhabiting these areas for generations, and so they may already know a lot much about these places. Gustav says ethical consideration, but also basic requirement without which it is difficult to operate. Hard to work unless accepted. True, and Gustav makes that's a very, very valid point of just looking at it from a basic ethical dimension, that if we're going into an area, is it even fair to think of doing something without having thought about the people who are already inhabiting that place? Then the next point is conservation tourism can play as a sustainable tool to promote positive attitude among local communities towards conservation and reduce human wildlife conflict. A fair point, like Moisab also mentioned. Traditionally, they have land ownership rights, and we cannot exclude them. Sure, it's an interesting point, Aftab, that you also Aftab Sahab, that you also bring in. Also, something that Benazir highlighted, that many of these are community-owned lands, and so involving them might be necessary from there also. The local economy retains local and gets distributed. I think Justin had made a point about locals leaving an area and trying to retain people in these areas. So I'm assuming it sort of addresses that point as well. Prevent retaliation when people are impacted. Yes, creating more resilient communities. Yes, Flavia. Risk of local involving sites where wildlife can be observed could be more easily known locally. That could potentially.
Ajay, a small
Yes.
a small question.
Yes.
I mean, just for the sake of the discussion, I'm sure you guys must have planned it, but can
Yes.
we separate the risks as a separate page altogether? Because then we
Sure.
might be able to capture it very well.
Sure.
Sorry, for my own convenience
Yeah,
sake, I'm
because at
requesting.
the I think so far what I'm getting is mostly the benefits, and
yeah,
I think what's coming on now is probably the first risk I'm seeing.
yeah. So maybe if you could just go through once, and if there is no
Sure.
more benefit,
Sure.
then we'll save it, clear it, and then we'll come
Sure.
back to the risk.
Fair
Right?
enough. Fair point.
If that works for everyone, please.
Yes, and that will also help us stay on time. Yeah, I think some of the points are sort of elaborating on what's already come. So Rushal also says the brain drain and retaining local, so which is also a benefit. Look back reiterates that it's a good tool to protect snow leopards, and Benazir tries to speak about. So Benazir talks about how capacity building can be and needs to be done, and that's something we'll go on to talk about, Benazir. That the locals will protect, foster trust. So I think there's a fair agreement that there are several benefits. So Costa, what I could now do is quickly come down to the risks. So if you would like to, I'll just list out the risks. So Anne Camille says that sites where wildlife can be observed could be more easily known locally. That could potentially lead to some illegal activities. So that's an important point. In terms of tourism, there's also this point that we often make, that why are some sites preferred by people over others? So hopefully that will come out through our discussion. Then the next risk is local people may change their traditional thoughts or on wildlife and values into a more commercial perspective. So that could be a potential risk. Johan also says unequal distribution of income could lead to conflicts within a community, and that could be a very negative impact. That could have a possible negative impact on conservation itself. Kaustubh, am I going too fast?
No, it's fine, Ajay.
Yeah.
I'll catch up. I promise I'll catch up.
Fair enough. Sure. The other risk Aftab Saab highlights is that over-tourism may be encouraged to make more money and can add in the stress on the NRs. Aftab Saab, would you want to clarify on that point a bit? I don't know if I'm getting that fully.
Yeah, it's and I mean the natural resources,
Okay.
because sometime I have seen in the areas where the community become more inclined to make more resources, more money, and they forget about the conservation altogether. So that risk is there.
Sure. Fair enough. Extraction can become a concern. Terry says community could become reliant on tourism and give up their traditional methods of income. That could lead to greater vulnerability in times of restricted travel, and we are all living through it, and I'm sure each of us will be able to relate to that. Again, I think just an extension of what Johan mentioned in her point. Rushal says risks could be that the benefits could be controlled by a few and not distributed. So that's again a point that's coming up in multiple lines of conversation. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to discuss that through some of the examples today and in subsequent sessions. And Moisab says, ensure participation of as many local people and households as possible, careful planning and operations. Again, a similar point, if it's unequally distributed, it could possibly have negative impacts, not just on the tourism effort itself, but possibly on conservation as well. So thanks so much. Johan brings out another very valid point, the one of baiting for wildlife, which could be a very real one. Thank you so much. I think this is really useful. I think this little session that we've had has really brought out some of those concerns, as well as benefits that involving communities can have. So just to sort of reiterate that it may not be an option to sort of involve or not involve, purely if we also looked at it from an ethical dimension, but how we involve is probably the more important question to sort of take on. And so there's just the last couple of points that have come in. I'll quickly take a look at those, and maybe we'll sort of stop the whiteboard and jump right into the examples.
Thanks, Ajay. No, that's great. And thanks, Kustub. I think you've done really well at outlining the rationale of why we're engaging communities. It is not just desirable, but like essential, especially for species such as a snow leopard. And I think it's basically from last time, sometimes we lose sight, especially with tourism, because it becomes about seeking and sighting snow leopards. But we recognized last time that conservation tourism is more about centered around communities. And I think the risks that came up, we can go into them a little bit deeper next week, but it's important to recognize there are risks. And I think we're going to go into them further next week and think of also broader risks related, for example, that some I see have coming up, like baiting, or not, that don't specifically focus on communities. But now we have, we might move on to the hows of engaging communities and discuss how we might go about this. And Johan, Terry, and Gertrude are ready to share a little bit about this and bring this forward to discuss it with us.